Hello and welcome back to It's Millie Making, where I'm Millie and this is a space where I talk about the past, present, and future of my making, mostly knitting. Today's video is going to be about 95% knitting and 5% other crafts. Yeah, other crafts, let's call it that. And this video is all about my 2025 Make 9 as well as like my overall knitting goals and intentions. So yeah, I guess it's like two parts of the video. Last year was the first time I ever made a Make 9, and I guess I should tell you what a Make 9 is, just in case you don't know. Basically, you pick out 9 different projects that you would like to make in the upcoming year. It can be knitting, sewing, embroidery. It can be 9 dishes you want to cook. It can be 9 movies you want to watch. Like, it's a very loose format, can be applied in any category you wish to. And when I was making my Make 9 last year, I was picking out projects that I had been wanting to make for some time, and I also wanted to make these projects with stash yarn. I'll talk about my success rate with my Make 9 later on in this video. And I guess without further ado, let's just get into my 2025 knitting goals, yeah, let's call it that. So I made myself like a little bingo board, which I'll put on the screen, and let me pull it up on my iPad so I can look at it. And I actually also made myself a bingo board for last year. I don't know if I want to share this or not, but if I do share it, it'll be on the screen. I did not get a bingo last year. I think I made it maybe like a little bit too hard, and also I kind of forgot about it halfway through the year, and then when I remembered about it at the end, I knew there was no way I was going to finish it, so I kind of lost the motivation. And that's okay. Like I said, this is all very low stakes. But I did make myself a little bingo board for this year, and I tried to make it a little bit easier. So I have a lot of repeats from last year. I'd still like to make 8 pairs of socks and have a no buy month. And then I put a lot of skills on my bingo board this year versus last year. Last year I think my projects were maybe a little bit too narrow, and they were also more focused on using specific yarns I had in my stash. And I've given myself less of a goal for that this year because my overall goal in regards to my yarn spending and yarn consumption is a little bit different, and they are formed from what I learned over the past year. So just, yeah, this is my bingo board. There's a lot of like pattern categories I would like to make, like a pair of convertible mittens, a fingering weight sweater, a blanket, as well as some skills I would like to learn or knit more, like intarsia. That's really the only skill. And then I couldn't fill up the bingo board with only knitting things, and I didn't want to force it. I wanted this to be things that I legitimately want to make, and I legitimately think I have a possibility of making. So I also threw in some sewing projects in there. So I would love to sew a pair of pants because it's so hard for me to find pants at the store that I haven't bought pants in like 2 years. I barely ever buy pants, and I just wear the ones I have until they have holes, which I guess is good, but also not good because a lot of times I don't have pants to wear. And I also gave myself some like easy squares, like finishing my mom and dad sweater. That's something I should be able to finish at the beginning of the year. And then like the 5 gift knits, I've already made 3 gift knits. So yeah, I tried to set myself up for success this year, whereas last year I really wasn't thinking, and I was just putting like a bunch of challenging things on the board, which I would have had to knit so much and remained totally focused to accomplish that. And like, that's just not me with my knitting. I like to go where the inspiration strikes. So that is my bingo board. And then I also just gave myself some general goals to help with my yarn purchasing. So last year was the first year I ever tracked how much yarn I was purchasing, how much money I was spending on yarn, and I also tried to track how much yarn I was using up. I didn't do as good of a job with the using up portion, but I will say I was surprised to see how much money I was spending on yarn, and this is with me being on a low buy for the first half of the year. All that said, more than 50% of my purchases last year were made during travels or at special occasions like yarn festivals or yarn crawls. That was the majority of my yarn spending. So those were purchases that were planned and budgeted for to a degree. That said, My goal in terms of spending for this year is I would just like to spend less than last year. I'm not giving myself like you have to spend X amount less than last year or an X percentage of last year. Even if I spend $1 less than last year, I will consider it a success. And I think it should be feasible because I do have a lot of yarn in stash. So last year, like if I shared my bingo board, you can see that I had specific goals of using up some of the older yarn in my stash, and I don't think that was a successful strategy because sometimes when I fixate so much on like I need to use this yarn, I need to use this yarn, I need to use this yarn, I kind of struggle with that because I generally pick up project first and then look for the yarn instead of vice versa. That's not gonna work for me. So here are like my general outlines and goals I put up so I can be more mindful this year. Oh, also, when I was watching some people's like 2024 what I made this year videos, I saw that people also tracked how much they spent on notions and patterns, and that's something that just like totally flew over my head. I didn't even think about it. However, I did go onto my Ravelry and I saw I only knit about 50% of the patterns that I purchased last year, which isn't great. I would love to knit 100% of the patterns that I purchase. And like the thing is, I think a lot of the purchases were I think the majority of the purchases that I made that I didn't end up knitting, it's like the designer released the pattern, they had some sort of discount, and then I wanted to purchase it during the discount. But the thing is, knitting patterns, okay, if you buy an individual knitting pattern, for me and like my personal budget, it's not that expensive. But once you are buying like 5 or 6 knitting patterns, that's like $30, $40. $50, and like that adds up very quickly. So I don't want to think about, I don't want to overthink, I do not want to overthink purchasing patterns, but my goal for this year is only purchase a pattern when you are ready to cast on. That is great that the designer is offering a sale, but knitting patterns are not that expensive to begin with, again, for my personal budget. So saving myself $1 or $2 when there's a sale, but then I never end up knitting the pattern, is just not worth it to me. And that way I can purchase the patterns that I'm actually knitting while still supporting the designers. Yes, that is my goal for knitting pattern purchasing this year. I would also not like, I'm also giving myself this goal of do not purchase any repeat needles or cords, because whenever I am going to buy a new pair of needle tips, or really I don't have that many duplicate needle tips, I have a lot of cords for like my Chiago needles, because whenever I would want to cast something on but I couldn't find the cord length that I needed, I would just go buy a new one. And I have so many cords, so if I find myself in need of a new cord, that just means I have too many projects on the needles. I either have to finish stuff or put stuff on stitch holders or frog something. It is not a sign that I need to go and purchase a new needle. And the same thing with needle tips. However, like I said, I don't really have many duplicate needle tips. I have them in various lengths, but like 4mm needles or 4.5mm needles, even though I knit with those often, I think I only have like one 5-inch set, one 4-inch set, and the 3-inch and 2-inch sets, but I only have singles of each. So that is my goal in regards to needle tips and cords. And then in terms of my yarn purchasing, like I said, I would like to spend less than I spent last year. Oh, and then like the biggest thing, I would like to have a net negative in my yarn stash. So I have a little spreadsheet where I am tracking all my yarn coming into my stash and yarn coming out of my stash. So I track how much I spent on it, how many balls of yarn I bought, or skeins or hanks, whatever form they come in, how many grams that is, and how many yards that is. So at the end of the year, I would like to have a net negative in terms of the number of balls of yarn I used, the grams of yarn that I used versus how much I purchased, as well as the length of yarn that I knit up versus how much I purchased. Last year, I didn't do the best job of tracking towards the end of the year, but I think I was close to a net negative, but I didn't need it. This year so far, I am on track for being on a net negative because I've been knitting a lot of smaller accessories, so they just like take up 1 or 2 balls of yarn very quickly. I have been running into some roadblocks because some of the projects I want to knit up are with leftovers from other projects, or they're like half balls of yarn, and I haven't been 100% sure how to work that into this method, but it's a learning process. Maybe I'll include them as like half skeins, like 0.5 or something like that. We'll see. If you have any ideas or tips on what I should do about that, please feel free to share. Oh, so that was about my yarn consumption. I did have 2 other self-suggestions for what I can do to help curb my yarn acquisition rate. So I would like to use at least 50% stash yarn for each project, which I followed last year, and for the most part, I think I was successful in that. I did have a few projects where I did buy a full sweater quantity of yarn, but if I was like doing color work, honestly, every time I did color work last year, I used like predominantly stash yarn, and I would like to be better about that this year. Which brings me to my 2 goals I think that will be hardest for me to follow. That is, I would like to knit 3 skeins of sock yarn before purchasing one. Because I just have too much sock yarn in stash considering how frequently, or I should say infrequently, I knit socks. And I think it's just because sock yarn is so easy to buy. It's just 1 skein, and I know I can get a pair of socks out of it. I don't have to worry about the weight. I don't have to worry about the length. Like, I know I will get use out of it. The thing is, I just don't knit socks that frequently. When I have my sock mojo, like, I'm great at knitting socks, but once I hit like a tiniest road bump, I'm like, oh, I don't really want to knit socks anymore. And then, what do you know, it's 6 months later. So yes, I would like to knit up 3 skeins of sock yarn before purchasing one. I do think the goal will be slightly easier because I have been knitting the Jigsaw Puzzle Blanket by Stephen West, which is like my year-long project for this year, and I am knitting that all with superwash fingering weight yarns that I have in stash at this point. So I have been using some of my sock yarn for that, and I actually have finished up 2 balls of sock yarn so far. And then this is, I think, going to be the hardest one, and I don't know how well I will be able to stick to it. And that is, before I purchase a sweater quantity of yarn, I need to knit 2 sweater quantities of yarn for my stash. And I have when I wrote this down, I thought it'd be so easy to follow because I didn't think that I purchased that much sweater quantities of yarn. Last year, I purchased 11 sweater quantities of yarn. I knit 4 of them up, and 2 of them are in like current whips. So I guess I did technically start knitting over 50% of it, but considering how much yarn I already had in stash, 11 sweater quantities was definitely more than I was planning to purchase. I'm trying to remember what they were. Some of them I did buy on vacation, and that was worth it because they were significantly cheaper than if I purchased them in the US. Then I purchased a sweater quantity of farm yarn, and then I purchased some yarn on sale. I don't know. I'm not going to beat myself up over my past self's purchases because even though I may buy a lot of yarn, I don't buy as much as some people, which I don't think is a very healthy mindset. But the most important thing is, generally, I think whatever I purchase, my tastes are pretty consistent. So it's not like I look at the yarn that I purchased a year or 2 ago and I'm like, oh, I don't like this color anymore. I don't like this base anymore. Like, my tastes are pretty consistent. That's a good thing. And also, like, with the rising cost of everything, I can't say I really regret my past self purchasing yarn on sale because I am good at finding a good deal. Okay, so that was like a very haphazard way of going about my 2025 knitting goals. But I guess overall, have a good time, make things that I want to wear that work with my closet, spend less money than last year, and just be mindful of what I'm purchasing, be it notions, be it knitting tools, be it knitting patterns, be it yarn. That is sweet and simple, okay? Now we can move into my Make 9. So I feel like last year when I was making my Make 9, I felt so confident, like, oh my god, I totally want to make these projects and I know exactly what yarn I want to use. And I will share like my Make 9 from last year at some point somewhere on the screen. And as you can see, I only did 2 projects out of my Make 9, and they were the simplest ones. And then I cast on a third, which was the Ingrid sweater, but I'm going to end up frogging that one because the yarn that I purchased for it wouldn't work out. So what did I learn from this? To be fair, I knew when I was making the list that I wasn't going to be able to make all of these projects because there are quite a number of complex projects on there. I also maybe made it a little bit too restrictive, picking like very specific patterns. But let me show you my Make 9 for this year, and I can talk about what I learned between then and now. So here is my Make 9 for this year, and as you can see, there are quite a number of repeat patterns because these are patterns that I would still like to make even though I didn't get to make them last year. I want to still make them this year, which I'm taking not as a bad thing, but actually as a good sign that when I picked those projects out, I knew myself. I knew I really like these and they're going to be long-term pieces in my closet. You may notice that there are also 2 sewing projects on this Make 9, and that's because I couldn't confidently come up with 9 projects that I knew that my enthusiasm for them would hold throughout the year. That's not to say that all the projects in my queue I'm not excited about. It's just that I know that I get excited from seeing something new, either a new release or seeing somebody else knitting like an older pattern, and I just couldn't pick out 9 projects that I knew that I 100% loved all of them, regardless of any new patterns coming out, that I would still love all of them. And I think I can say that all the projects on this list, I do feel like 100% in my heart I love them. Even if there's something new, these ones are still going to be at the top of the list. And then I also made some of these into categories versus that exact pattern, because while I do want to knit that exact pattern, it's kind of a little bit more important for me to knit something in that category. So I guess without further ado, let's just talk about the projects and the yarns I would like to use for them. Because again, I would really like this Make 9 to be something that I make with stash yarn. So first, I guess we can talk about the easiest project, because that is the one that is already on my needles. And that is Cardigan number 9 by My Favorite Things Knitwear. So if you watched my most worn sweaters of 2024 video, you may remember I said that 2 conclusions I came is I really like crew neck cardigans and I really like sweaters knit with unspun wool. And this sweater is a combination of both those things. I'm knitting it with Manchalope held with a strand of Drops Kid Silk mohair in this dark brown colorway, and I'm knitting a pattern that I already knit last year. I wear my cardigan number 9 so much, and this is like this dark brown chocolatey color is like one of my favorite colors of the moment. So this is just like a win overall. And I did include it in my Make 9 to give my like a little step ahead. Like it was already cast on. I think I cast it on Christmas or Christmas Eve. So I 100% know I will have at least 1 out of 9 projects on my Make 9. The second project that is a repeat pattern is the Scrappy Sweater number 23. Actually, now that I think about it, the 2 patterns that were on my Make 9 from last year that I successfully knit were also 2 repeat patterns. So this is another repeat pattern. This was on my Make 9 for 2024, and I've actually knit this pattern thrice for myself. So clearly I'm a big fan. So I'd like to make a scrappy version of this sweater. I'd really like to knit more scrappy projects this year because it's a great way to utilize my yarn stash, and I think of color combinations that maybe I wouldn't normally think of. Like, I think the majority of the colorwork projects that I knit last year, I really tried my best to stick to yarns from stash, and I think I came up with some unique color combinations I wouldn't have otherwise reached for or I thought about. And I actually do have an idea for what like scrappy color palette I want to knit the sweater number 23 in, and that is yet another chocolate brown sweater, because I have a lot of chocolate brown farm yarn. However, most of it I do not have sweater quantities for, so instead I thought I could do like a scrappy striped version, and it would kind of remind me of like some of the Noro colorways, like their natural stripy colors, where they have like, it is striped, but it's like all stripes of different shades of cream or like all stripes of different shades of brown. And I could do the same thing. And it'd be like very cool and local, because all of the farm yarn I have is either like from New Jersey or from Connecticut. I might also have some from New York. It's basically like a tri-state farm yarn sweater. And I'm totally excited for that project. The other scrappy sweater that I would love to knit is the Kaleido cardigan by Rose Knitwear. I think this one is so cool. I have been contemplating, this is a topic I've been thinking of. So I've been contemplating if I should purchase this pattern or not, because this is a steeked pattern and it is knit bottom up. I'm unsure if you knit the yoke flat or not, but if you know me, I don't like bottom up patterns. They're just not my vibe. So I've been thinking of if I just knit some sort of drop shoulder cardigan pattern. Like I have some of the ones from Ozetta in my pattern library, and I would just do like a similar striping sequence to the Rose Knitwear pattern. And I'm pretty confident at this point that I can modify any cardigan. I'm pretty confident I can modify a simple cardigan pattern to be steeked. So do I need to purchase a pattern? Do I need to spend $10 on a pattern if I can just make it up myself using something that I already have? I don't know. What is the ethics around that? Because I'm not selling the pattern. Like I'm not taking somebody else. I'm not taking inspiration and then selling it. I'm just taking inspiration and making it and saving myself $10. But is that okay? Or it's like, if I don't need to, basically I'm trying to think of, if I can look at a picture and knit something without purchasing the pattern, is that okay? Or like, should I purchase a pattern to support the designer? Because I wouldn't have this idea if I didn't see this designer's work. I don't know. You tell me. Chime in with your thoughts, please. The next sweater that I absolutely 100% want to make is the Nordic Mix sweater by Laura Dalgaard. I have been eyeing this sweater since before it came out, but I have been thinking a long time about what colors I want to knit it in, and I've finally settled on a purple and brown combination. I don't remember what brown yarn I said I was going to use in my winter knitting plans video, but it has been switched around once again. So back during the New Jersey Ship and Fiber Festival show, I don't know the name of it, but it's basically like Rhinebeck, but for New Jersey. I bought a sweater quantity of this dark chocolatey brown farm yarn, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use as much of that sweater quantity as I need as a dark brown color, and the purple color is this Noro yarn and Lang yarns that I have in stash, and that will be my color combination. And then whatever brown yarn I have left over can go into my scrappy farm yarn sweater number 23. Because my initial plan had been, I think, to mix a bunch of different browns in the Nordic Mix sweater, but I realized that's just going to be that's just going to be difficult with all the color work going on. So why don't I just make things easier for myself and use the sweater quantity? And honestly, that is a mantra I have to keep reminding myself, and it's something I started implementing last year and I would like to continue implementing this year, and that is, don't save yarn for future projects. Use the yarn that you already have. Like if you bought yarn for a specific project, but you're not casting that project on right now, just use the yarn anyways. You can always purchase more yarn for that project in the future, because who knows if you will even like the yarn and project combination or the color and project combination. So if you have yarn in stash saved for a future project, but it would also work perfectly for a current project, the current project takes priority. And I am just reminding myself that. And I had to remind myself that again this year already, because I was knitting a pair of mittens for my mom, and I had a bunch of knitting for Olive, merino, and soft silk mohair in the bottle green colorway, and she specifically wanted bottle green mitts. I was like, I could buy some because I don't want to break into the sweater quantity. I was like, no, you are knitting the mitts now. Use the yarn that you have now. If you need more yarn in the future, you can always purchase more yarn. There's if it's a different dialect, that's okay. There's helical knitting, there's striping. It's not the end of the world. Commercially dyed yarn, it tends to be pretty consistent. Maybe you won't even need that extra ball of yarn. You don't need to worry about that now. And I guess I keep saying you, and I'm talking to you, and I'm talking to me. I'm talking to us. Okay, so we're down to 4 projects, and I have 3 more knitting projects. We can talk about the Hana sweater very briefly, because if you've watched any of my previous videos, you know how much I've been wanting to knit this sweater, and it's happening this year, guys. It's happening. Everybody who told me to cast it on last video, or my winter knitting plans video, you're on my mind. I'm just waiting until I finish some of my current sweaters, and then it'll be my first cast on. I promise. And I will be knitting that with Brooklyn Tweed Shelter in the cream colorway, because I love the combination of like a simple color with a complex pattern, because then I get something that's very easily wearable but not boring. I don't know if I would be able to knit a plain white sweater. I think it might lose my interest. And then the last two sweaters are the ones where my lips have been so dry, I can't tell if they're peeling or not. Apologies if they are and you can see it on camera. The downsides of 4K. Okay, I'm back with a fresh layer of lip balm. The last two knitting projects that I would like to knit this year, I did pick specific patterns, but I also have just opened myself up to these being a general category, because while I absolutely love these patterns and I absolutely do want to make them, maybe I will find something easier that I would like to tackle first. And I would still consider that a success in terms of my make night if I completed the easier projects. Pattern number one is the Paul Klee sweater by Midori Hirose / any fingering weight sweater. I have so many fingering weight sweater quantities in stash because it's obviously much more affordable to buy 3 skeins of hand-dyed yarn versus 6 skeins of hand-dyed yarn, and I can knit them as fingering weight sweaters. I could hold them double with mohair to knit a DK weight sweaters. Honestly, the possibilities are endless. And I actually have cast on a fingering weight sweater in the past. The Twig sweater by Junko Okamoto I cast on in 2023, and I didn't even finish the yoke. So the goal this year is to finish a fingering weight sweater. That could be me finishing the twigs, that could be me knitting this Paul Klee sweater, that could be me knitting some other fingering weight sweater. I don't think I have it in me to knit a plain, like purely stockinette plain fingering weight sweater. I think I would just really lose steam. But I think hopefully with picking a colorwork project, I would have a higher chance of success. Especially because a Paul Klee sweater has a looser gauge, so hopefully it would knit up more quickly than something that has like a 32 stitch gauge. That would honestly drive me to boredom. And then the last pattern in the Make 9, my magnum opus, my most favorite vintage pattern of all time, that I don't know if I will ever have the strength or motivation or skill or confidence to knit, but I'm including it in my Make 9 anyways, is the Henri in Pennsylvania sweater, which is from one of the earlier editions of Rowan magazine, and it is by the Seaton. I think it's Jessi. I want to say Jessi James, but I don't think that's right. They are the Seatons. I'll just call them the Seatons. They are, I think that like 89% sure, 90% sure, 89, 90, same thing. I'm fairly confident they are the founders of the clothing brand Toast. Before they created Toast, they were creating knitting patterns, which is pretty cool. And this is one of their knitting patterns from the 80s. And it's hard to tell from this background, from the picture. So it looks like it's just like a bunch of those like Matisse motifs, which would be difficult, but it's actually even more difficult because the background is a low contrast checkerboard pattern. So each row has like 20 color ranges. It has a lot going on, but I think it is honestly a work of art. And when I first discovered the sweater pattern in 2023, I want to say, I made like a mini mock-up of how I would like to make it with my own color scheme, and I just think it's so pretty, so beautiful. It'd be such a unique piece, and it would really just be like the pinnacle of my knitting, and I would love to get it done. I just don't know if I have it in me. I feel like it's a lot. It's definitely a lot. But if I don't do that, I would still love to knit something with intarsia, preferably a garment, just so I can improve those skills before I work myself up to this project. Because I think that would be a lot, because I have very minimal experience with intarsia. I definitely like to get some more experience with intarsia before I knit something that has like 20 bobbins in a row. Lastly, I have 2 sewing patterns / categories. First, I would love to sew a pleated skirt that has just been on, oh my god, it's getting dark again. What else is new? That has just been on my list forever. This is the Blake skirt. I did not write the designer's name, so I do not remember off the top of my head. It'll be somewhere on the screen. And this just has a little bit of a pleat in the front, and then the rest is just plain. People have told me that pleated skirts are not difficult to sew, but when you have rarely sewn anything, and if everything is difficult or everything is daunting. So I would love to knit knit. I would love to sew this skirt, and then if I enjoy making it and enjoy wearing it, maybe I will sew a fully pleated skirt in the future. And then my second sewing project that I included in my Make 9 is a lighter quilted coat. I have 2 of the quilted coats from New York, and they're some of like my favorite pieces in my closet. I always just feel so happy whenever I wear them, and I'd really love to make my own quilted coat, specifically a lighter version because those are warmer coats. So I really love this Rue quilt coat by Spaghetti Western Sewing. There's so many beautiful versions. Totally recommend checking out the hashtag on Instagram and seeing all the versions that people made. People use pre-quilted fabric, people use vintage quilts, people quilt their own fabrics. There's just so many different options. And if you watched my last knitting podcast, I purchased this like pink and red woven fabric that is so beautiful, and I think it would look really good in this coat. Also, I could possibly quilt like a quilt top for this coat. Maybe I could make both of them. And then I also saw a recently released pattern for another quilted coat, and it had like these bow tie closures down the center, and that was also very cute. Either way, I am manifesting sewing myself some sort of quilted coat in 2025. Why is it so hard for me to say that? Quilted coat, quilted coat, coat. Quilted coat, quilted coat. I want to make a quilted coat. Okay, and that is N. Oh my god, I just realized I didn't tell you what yarns I want to use for the Paul Klee and the Henri in Pennsylvania. Basically, I will use an eclectic mix of fingering weight yarns for those projects. I have a ton of fingering weight yarn in stash. I actually think for the Henri in Pennsylvania yarn, I bought a bunch of like single skeins of Knitting for Olive Merino and Sandnes Garn Sunday just to see the colors, to get an idea of what I want to use. I think if I do knit that Henri in Pennsylvania sweater, I would end up purchasing yarn because I want the colors to be very, very exact, because it's just going to take so much time and so much labor. I want to be very exacting with my materials. I want it to look exactly how I'm envisioning it. That is my Make 9 for 2025. When I look at the things, I'm like, oh, this seems like pretty reasonable. I could get it done. But then, who knows? I get distracted. Sometimes I go through spells where I'm not really knitting that much. Like lately, I honestly have not been knitting that much. And it is what it is. That is life. And if you made a Make 9, I would love to know what is on your Make 9. Did any of the patterns or projects that I shared inspired you to put them on your Make 9? Or just like your winter knitting goals, whatever. I know not everybody likes making a Make 9 because like a year is a pretty big commitment. I'd also love to hear of any knitting or sewing or making goals you have for this new year. And as always, I would love to know what you are working on while watching this video because I'm nosy and I'd love to know what's on other people's needles. It's been a weird week and I don't know how frantic I came off in this video. It's like of everything that's going on in this world and in this country. And I also just haven't recorded in 2 weeks, so I feel like a little bit out of it. My next video will be another knitting podcast, hopefully with some finished objects, finished gift knits. Yes, if you would like to see that video, please feel free to follow along and give this video a like. Also, I think between the time of this video and my last video, I hit 5K, which is very, very exciting. So thank you so much for that. That feels like such an incredible milestone, and I'm so grateful for the knitting community here. Do I have anything else to say? I don't think so. As always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you are staying warm and cozy if you are in the northern hemisphere, and if you're somewhere warm, I hope you are enjoying sun and the outdoors and just enjoying the beautiful weather. That is the end of this video. Thanks again for watching. Hope to see you again next time. Bye!